Well, it would take a lot to push the first pardon by a president of the United States to that president's son out of the top news story slot in the American news media, but Donald Trump was able to do it. He did it with his history-making string of the most ridiculous presidential appointments in history this weekend, beginning with the first presidential nominee in history to have served time in federal prison, to later be pardoned by the president who is now nominating him, who, oh, by the way, is a family member. Donald Trump has chosen the convicted felon, Charles Kushner, to be his ambassador to France, an insult to France. It is a position for which convicted federal felon Charles Kushner is uniquely unqualified. Here's what the Republican U.S. attorney who prosecuted Charles Kushner in 2004 had to say about him.
It was so obvious he had to be prosecuted that, I mean, if a guy hires a prostitute to seduce his brother-in-law and videotapes it and then sends the videotape to his sister to attempt to intimidate her from testifying before a grand jury, do I really need any more justification than that? I mean, it's one of the most loathsome, disgusting crimes that I prosecuted when I was U.S. attorney.
Loathsome and disgusting, now the theme of the Trump confirmation process. That is not the only loathsome and disgusting behavior that has been documented among the Trump choices for his cabinet. On the same weekend that Donald Trump chose his daughter's father-in-law, a convicted felon, to serve as ambassador to France, after Donald Trump pardoned him, Joe Biden chose to pardon his son for crimes that surely would not have been prosecuted if Hunter Biden's father were not the president of the United States when Joe Biden was running for re-election, and assuming he would serve another 4 years in office, he said he would not pardon his son. But things have changed dramatically since he said that, with Donald Trump's election and Donald Trump's public promise to use the full force of federal prosecutorial power against his political enemies, which include anyone named Biden. To carry out that promise, Donald Trump nominated the absurdly unqualified Matt Gaetz for Attorney General. That nomination went down in flames of truth in a matter of days. And then this weekend, Donald Trump nominated an equally unqualified Trump acolyte for Director of the FBI, Kash Patel, who has promised to use federal investigative power to harm Trump enemies. Donald Trump and Kash Patel have both publicly promised unfair, illegitimate use of prosecutorial power against allies of Joe Biden, which obviously include Hunter Biden. And so, with that turn of events, that changed circumstances, Joe Biden obviously decided his son should not be subjected to a malicious Trump witch hunt, which Donald Trump promises will be malicious and unfair. The history of presidential pardons for family members is thin. It now includes only 3 presidents, Joe Biden, Donald Trump, and Bill Clinton, who on his last day in office pardoned his brother Roger Clinton, who had pleaded guilty to trying to sell cocaine to an undercover police officer, a crime for which Roger Clinton served more than a year in prison. There is nothing in the personal history of any of the other presidents of the United States from George Washington forward to indicate that any one of them would not have done exactly what Joe Biden did in pardoning his son for nonviolent crimes committed under the influence of alcohol and heavily addictive drugs, including heroin. Donald Trump has nominated another former heroin addict to his cabinet, Robert Kennedy Jr. If you ask the friends and family members of the 2 wives of Robert Kennedy Jr. while he was a heroin addict, they might find what Robert Kennedy Jr. did while he was a heroin addict was much worse than anything Hunter Biden ever did. Robert Kennedy Jr.'s second wife was driven to suicide, in the view of many of the people closest to her in the final year of her life, by Robert Kennedy. But Donald Trump seems to think that everything Robert Kennedy Jr. did in his self-confessed heroin addiction is not just pardonable, but completely forgettable. The validity of the Biden pardon stands on its own merits as a legal matter. It has the classic components of a legitimate pardon: nonviolent crimes for which no one has ever been sentenced to prison time, both of those crimes committed literally on paper and under the influence of drugs. One of the crimes is an answer on paper on a gun permit application, and the other a matter of inadequate tax filings for which Hunter Biden has paid the taxes in full. That's it. Donald Trump's selection of a new FBI director in January will, of course, require the firing of the first FBI director Trump appointed, Christopher Wray. FBI directors now serve 10-year terms, and so Christopher Wray, appointed by Donald Trump, remained in office during the Biden administration. FBI directors can be fired for cause. Donald Trump's cause for firing Christopher Wray will be a lie. And on the basis of that lie, Donald Trump will send to the Senate Judiciary Committee for confirmation Kash Patel, the man who said he wants to destroy and eliminate the unit of the FBI that is tonight standing between us and the next 9/11 attack.
The FBI's footprint has gotten so freaking big, and the biggest problem the FBI has come out of its intel shops. I'd break that component out of it. I'd shut down the FBI Hoover building on day one and reopening the next day as a museum of the deep state.
And the day after that, every terrorist in the world and in the United States now has an open invitation to try their next version of 9/11. And there won't be a single FBI agent on their trail, not one. He wants to demolish the intelligence unit. If Kash Patel somehow survives the confirmation process, it now seems that unlikely that Donald Trump's completely unqualified choice for Secretary of Defense will be able to survive one round of questioning in a Senate confirmation hearing of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Last week, we read to you the contents of the Monterey, California police report investigation of what a woman identified in the report only as John Doe described as a sexual assault and rape by Pete Hegseth in a California hotel room in 2017. The police report did not reach a conclusion about what happened in the hotel room after the police took statements from Jane Doe and Pete Hegseth. The police referred the matter to the district attorney's office, which chose not to try to prosecute the case, but also did not reach a finding about the case. With Jane Mayer's important breaking news reporting today, we now know much more about what the testimony will be in the Senate Armed Services Committee, where if Pete Hegseth loses even a single Republican vote in the committee, his nomination cannot get through that committee. That committee includes two Republican women, Deb Fischer of Nebraska and Joni Ernst of Iowa, who will be listening to testimony about Pete Hegseth's behavior while serving as the president of a very small organization called Concerned Veterans for America, funded by rich Republican billionaires. Jane Mayer reports that Pete Hegseth was forced to resign from that group after an internal investigation described him as, quote, being repeatedly intoxicated while acting in his official capacity to the point of needing to be carried out of the organization's events. The detailed 7-page report, which was compiled by multiple former Concerned Veterans of America employees and sent to the organization's senior management in February 2015, states that at one point, Hegseth had to be restrained while drunk from joining the dancers on the stage of a Louisiana strip club where he had brought his team. The report also says that Hegseth, who was married at the time, and other members of his management team sexually pursued the organization's female staffers, whom they divided into two groups, the party girls and the not party girls. In addition, the report asserts that under Hegseth's leadership, the organization became a hostile workplace that ignored serious accusations of impropriety, including an allegation made by a female employee that another employee on Hegseth's staff had attempted to sexually assault her at that Louisiana strip club. Jane Mayer's reporting also described Pete Hegseth as someone else and someone else drunk at a bar at a Sheraton hotel. Quote, the duo yelled, "Kill all Muslims," multiple times in what the staffer described as a drunk and violent manner. The staffer that described that behavior in an email obtained by the New Yorker concluded that email saying, "I sincerely care about the mission of CVA and the future of my kids and the country." Reached for comment. The author of the letter said, "If you print that, I will deny I wrote it." So much for him caring about the future of his kids and the country. The first time a president of the United States had a cabinet nominee defeated in the Senate confirmation process was when the seemingly easy to confirm Republican Senator John Tower was nominated by George H.W. Bush to the very same job that Pete Hegseth wants, Secretary of Defense. John Tower was eminently qualified, having served as the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, where his nomination was expected to sail through unanimously, as former Senate chairmen always do sail through confirmation hearings. But it was drunkenness and what they used to call in those days womanizing that brought him down.
My own review of the record, however, has led me to the firm conclusion that in 3 areas, the abuse of alcohol, the provision of consulting services to defense contractors on the probable outcomes of ongoing confidential arms control negotiations shortly after serving as an arms control negotiator, as well as instances of indiscreet behavior toward women, John Tower falls short of the standards, the high standards, which must be demanded of those who would bear the awesome responsibilities of Secretary of Defense.